We might actually have more answers than we realise when it comes to what Dave Filoni is doing in Ahsoka and in his own Star Wars movie, the Mando-verse film. We know Timothy Zahn consulted on the former, and a lot of fans have been talking about Heir to the Empire and adapting it for Star Wars canon, but here's another proposal. What if it's not Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy they're adapting, but rather elements of Zahn's Duology, the Hand of Thrawn duology, which started with 1997's Spectre of the Past and ended in 1998's Vision of the Future? This book has a lot of things which have parallels to The Mandalorian, and it seems as though Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have drawn from it. Let me go through this. So in these two books, there are rumours that Thrawn survived, and I should just make one very clear distinction: the timelines are not exact, but as I say, these are just adaptations. They just drew different elements from it. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but bear with me. So this duology takes place 10 years after The Last Command, the final book of the Heir to the Empire trilogy. And just in case you're lost, that means 10 years after The Mandalorian. So we're after Return of the Jedi. There are rumours of Thrawn's return, very similar to the way that there are rumours the Empire's returning in Ahsoka and The Mandalorian. Aside from the threat to the New Republic, there are also pirates, and not just pirates, but clones. Thrawn has a new army, and he's got a storehouse called the Hand of Thrawn in what is known as Wild Space. And while there is already a concept of wild space in canon, the one in Legends really denotes something beyond the unknown regions. This could be canonized as the New Beyond, rumoured in the Ahsoka show. This is where Thrawn is hiding. This might be where he has a new storehouse, but also clones. Now this is where it gets interesting. I predicted back in 2021, when they canonized Mount Tantiss in the Bad Batch, that they were going to tie this into the Mando-verse later in the timeline, and they might do that here. It could turn out that just like in Legends, Thrawn, after Palpatine, also used Wayland, but now in the Ahsoka show, to be hidden from the New Republic, he's doing it from the New Beyond. Could they be bringing these concepts from the Hand of Thrawn duology into canon in Star Wars Ahsoka? Could a character like Marrow be a clone? In the Hand of Thrawn duology, the cloning facility and the archives were in a place called Nirawan, a place that Mara Jade and Luke investigated. This might be something Ahsoka investigates with Sabine. There are more similarities when you talk about secret organizations, such as the Shadow Council. In Legends, it was called the Empire of the Hand, and just like Moff Gideon and those we saw in Season 3 of Mando, they're waiting for Thrawn's return. And the whole book investigates rumours. Is Thrawn still alive? A fantastic duology, and some say it's better than Heir to the Empire. Could they be adapting this in some way? And if this adaptation theory is somewhat true, then it's going to bleed into Skeleton Crew. They're sprinkling this around the Mandalorian era shows. And even the tone of Ahsoka is much more reminiscent of the Hand of Thrawn than it is of Heir to the Empire. Mystery, some elements of fantasy horror, and even the slogans in the promos. For example, something is coming, something dark. Baylan preparing for war. It's all very ominous, all very Timothy Zahn, and it wouldn't be surprising if this is just a coincidence, because as I say, Zahn consulted on the show, so no doubt he had some kind of influence on the overall creative feel of it. I'm so excited though. Exactly 2 weeks to go. And so now, my dear friends, some Star Wars news. Disney is making some alterations to the original trilogy, whether it's in comic form, in the upcoming Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View book. They've kind of changed the reasons why, for example, Obi-Wan didn't tell Luke that Darth Vader was his father. Well, in a new comic, they've given some context to Boba Fett's original death in Return of the Jedi when he falls into the Sarlacc pit. Now, obviously the book of Boba Fett shows us what happened next. He escaped the Sarlacc pit, very differently to the way he did in Legends. But now he's back in canon in the New Republic era, and I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of that show. I recently also got the collector's edition of the Book of Boba Fett, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But now in Star Wars Hyperspace Stories issue number 7, Boba Fett's Return of the Jedi death was predicted by Bossk, and now they're making it Boba Fett's fault. So forget the Han Solo stuff, the Luke stuff, the battle over the pit of Carkoon. They're now saying there was more to the reason Boba Fett fell in. More to do with his personality, his arrogance, and overconfidence, and Bossk predicts his arrogance is going to make him susceptible to attacks, and maybe even death. The issue follows Boba Fett as he helps a Wookiee named Favine, one of my favourite Wookiees in all of Star Wars at the moment, and the two are ambushed by a group of hunters led by Bossk, who attempts to kidnap the Wookiee. When he rescues her, Boba finds himself in an intense battle to not only save her, but also do away with Bossk once and for all. and when it looks like he's got the Trandoshan right where he wants him, he becomes so easily blinded as he's netted one of Bosk's crew. But then Bosk gives Boba Fett a wake-up call, and he says this: "You're arrogant, Boba. You always have been. Better learn to watch yourself." And there were elements of this in his character if you watch the Clone Wars. Boba went through a lot of trauma losing Jango Fett, and as a result he had to grow up very fast. And on many occasions this came across as arrogance. But the way it's worded, "You better watch yourself, it might be your downfall," seems like a deliberate reference to what eventually happens to Boba Fett on Tatooine. But I do think it's unfair to draw parallels to the two, because Boba Fett was working for Jabba the Hutt. He had to jump in with the Skiff guards and try and save Jabba and the rest, and try and force Luke and his friends into the Sarlacc pit. But it's interesting to see this foreshadowing. Was Boba Fett a bit too arrogant? Well, certainly not after he survived, and now that he's daimyo. He's learnt a lot of lessons, he's put that life behind him. And on the subject of Boba Fett, the new collector's edition is a lot of fun. There are some HD pictures from the show, like you've never seen it before, some recaps of every episode, and my favourite bit is about Cad Bane, because you already know what I was looking for. Confirmation or denial on if he survived. There is nothing about that here. But interestingly enough, when it came to his appearance, Dave Filoni, as you would expect, being all about hats himself, was mostly concerned about getting Cad Bane's hat right. Not the blue skin tone or texture or anything like that. His biggest concern was the hat. Well, in my opinion, they got it right. And so now, my dear friends, moving on. It's been nearly 8 years since The Force Awakens released, the big return of Star Wars to the big screen, but it's only now we're finding out some behind-the-scenes information, and every year we get some little tidbits about the sequel trilogy that add some context to things that were in those films. Well, now it turns out that Kathleen Kennedy, the controversial Lucasfilm president, had a big role to play in a creative decision for the main villain, Kylo Ren. We're all familiar with Captain Phasma's chrome dome outfit, her silver suit. Well, did you know that armor started out as a rejected Kylo Ren costume? J.J. Abrams didn't like it, but Kathleen Kennedy did, and so they saved it for Captain Phasma. So when some say Kathleen Kennedy has no input on these films, she does. She's almost always on set when it comes to The Mandalorian as well. Through generations of Star Wars, we've seen variations of the Stormtroopers, and in the upcoming Ahsoka show there are going to be some golden Stormtroopers, known as the Army of the Undead, and they work for Grand Admiral Thrawn. But in the sequel trilogy, one of the best characters in my opinion was Gwendoline Christie's Captain Phasma, and Gwendoline has said many times that Captain Phasma survived Episode 8, and fans were impressed with that get-up. Even at Star Wars Celebration back in April, you still see so many people who cosplay as Phasma. While Kathleen Kennedy insisted the design be kept for Adam Driver as Kylo Ren, even though JJ felt it was unsuitable for the character, I would say avoiding the knight in shining armor look for Kylo Ren was a good call. It works for Phasma though. Now staying on the subject of Kylo Ren for just a minute, in the upcoming From a Certain Point of View Return of the Jedi book, they're going to finally give us the answer of how Kylo Ren obtained Darth Vader's helmet. Or let me correct myself, because there is a long period of time between episodes 6 and 7. They're going to tell us what happened to his helmet generally, before it was in the possession of the First Order. According to Star Wars Books on Twitter, the novel explores beyond Anakin's death, so they're going a bit beyond that scope, trying to answer some burning questions. And in this way, we're even going to hear about Enric Pride, who is still getting over how the Empire lost this conflict, and that could see the start of some kind of Imperial remnants before Thrawn, before Moff Gideon, and before the Shadow Council. The biggest clue they might answer this is they reveal that Pride wakes up on Endor after the second Death Star's been destroyed, and they do mention the entire Endor system, so there could be some tie-ins to The Rise of Skywalker, and also a hunt from surviving Imperials to find Vader's helmet, or anything they can of the defeated Empire. Before Kylo Ren, it may have ended up in the possession of Thrawn. Imagine if we see it in the Ahsoka series, for it to eventually end up in Snoke and Kylo Ren's possession. But with that said, my dear friends, share your thoughts on everything we spoke about in the comments down below. Please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and if you want more videos you can't find here on YouTube, then click the link down there in the description. But until the next one, guys, may the Force be with you, always.